Up next on Book TV, a panel discussion on the creation of the 6th floor museum at Dealey Plaza, housed in the former Texas School Book Depository, which remembers the life, presidential tenure, and assassination of President John F. Kennedy. This is an hour.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. This is truly a remarkable audience. I have been with the museum now for 13 years, and I can't think of another event, another program where we've had an audience quite like this. There are far too many people who require recognition for me to catch everyone's name, so please forgive me if I don't acknowledge you. But I do want to point out some of our special guests today. Jim Lavelle, the retired police detective who was handcuffed to Lee Harvey Oswald at the time he was shot, is here. You might want to save your applause because I got a lot to go through here, so hang on. And seated very close to Jim is Eugene Boone, the Dallas deputy sheriff who discovered the rifle on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository that day. And also over in that area we have Phyllis Hall, I believe, a nurse from Parkland Hospital who was in trauma room number 1 when President Kennedy died. And also over there is Rose Blatch, who worked for the Time Life Bureau in Houston at the time of the assassination. And over behind Rose we have the wonderful Julian Reed, who was press aide to Governor John Connally at the time of the assassination. And on Julian's row is Pierce Allman, one of the first reporters inside this building after the assassination. Pierce was later our tour narrator for the audio tour, which continues to guide guests through the 6th floor exhibit today. I think I got that section over in here. I do want to go through this very quickly. We do have some eyewitnesses to the assassination here. We have Tina Towner Pender, who's here, who was our youngest photographer in Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination. Seated behind Tina are Bill and Gail Newman, the closest civilian eyewitnesses to President Kennedy at the time of his shooting. Is James Tague here today? He was supposed to be here. I'm not sure if he is or not, but that's okay. We hope all is well with Jim. Let's see, we have some other folks here. Wayman Rose, who was the 10th juror selected for the Jack Ruby trial, is here today. Let's see, is Dr. Phil Williams here? All right, all right. Well, I know we have others, and we have a number of museum founders as well as people involved in the story of the assassination. Here on the front row, Alan and Cynthia Mondell are wonderful documentarians who created the films that you continue to see on the 6th floor to this day. Where is Bob Staples and Barbara Charles?
Bob's here
wonderful.
And Barbara's over there.
Okay, here on either side of the room are wonderful exhibit designers who created such a wonderful display which continues to fascinate our visitors almost 25 years after the museum opened. Jackie McElhaney is here, who did research for the exhibit and also was involved in reconstructing the sniper's perch. A number of our board members, past and present, are here. Nancy Cheney, I see, John Crane, Jill Johnson, over here Victor Elmore, Ruben Esquivel is here somewhere. There he is, wonderful. We're so happy to have all of you here today. There's so many friends and family and professional colleagues. We are so honored to have all of you here, to be here to celebrate the museum's history and to look back on how this museum became a reality. I've written a book about the history of this museum, and as an introduction today, before I introduce these two ladies, I want to go back in time a little bit and provide a little context so we understand what happened here to this site between November 22nd, 1963, and when these fine ladies became involved in this project in the 1970s. And we have to start, of course, with the day of the assassination. Here are these two women here. We wouldn't be here today. We would not be able to speak in this historic space without these two women. And we and history owe them a great debt of thanks. And so we're honored to have them here with us today. I want to begin with the assassination of President Kennedy, which had a profound impact on people around the world. But here in Dallas, this was a devastating tragedy that left indelible wounds that were not easily healed. Virtually overnight, Dealey Plaza became the city's most visited site. Mourners and curiosity seekers transformed the plaza into a shrine with flowers and note cards. And at the center of this experience was the Texas School Book Depository building. When the textbook distribution company vacated this warehouse in 1970, there was an immediate public outcry to tear down the structure. Many in the local community viewed this structure as an eyesore and a painful reminder of the assassination. The anger directed locally at this building stemmed from the international criticism that Dallas endured after the assassination. In the months and years leading up to President Kennedy's visit, a vocal minority of extremists had dominated the political image of the city. And in the aftermath of the president's death, Dallas bore a stigma as a city of hate that took years to shed. Ashamed and angry, Dallasites naturally sought to distance themselves from the darkest moment in the city's modern history. Though eager to put the assassination behind them, local residents did not forget to honor the memory of President Kennedy. A bronze marker was unveiled in Dealey Plaza in 1966, while Philip Johnson's cenotaph, the John F. Kennedy Memorial, was dedicated nearby in 1970. But it was here, in this building, that visitors from around the world, estimated at over 1 million annually, gathered in Dealey Plaza to discuss the assassination, remember President Kennedy, and experience history through their own eyes. There was initially an effort by State Senator Mike McCool for the state of Texas to purchase the building, but he found no support in the Senate. And in 1970, a Nashville music promoter purchased the building at public auction, hoping to open a museum and research center. But unable to secure financial backing, Aubrey Mayhew lost the depository in 1972. At this point, a public outcry to demolish the building really gained momentum. Community leaders such as Tom Landry, Mary Kay Ash, and Ross Perot advocated tearing down the depository, and a group of business executives formed an organization called Dallas Onward and pledged over $100,000 to purchase the building and demolish it. Ultimately, after the Dallas City Council, led by Mayor Wes Wise, froze demolition permits on the building, Dallas County, led by Public Works Director Judson Shook, arranged to purchase the depository as part of a 1977 bond package. After several years of renovations, the building was renamed the Dallas County Administration Building, housing the Commissioner's Court, Public Works, and the Civil Division of the Dallas District Attorney's Office. Upon its reopening in 1981, it received a Texas historical marker, publicly acknowledging, for the first time, its place in history. The question remained, however, what do we do with the infamous 6th floor? And that's where our story begins today. Lyndalyn, you were chair of the Dallas County Historical Commission when the county bought the building. Take us back to your first visit to that empty floor and your first reaction when you found out that there might be an exhibition on the 6th floor of this building.
Well, I'm going even farther back than that.
Okay,
because
it's your program.
I was appointed in 1975 to be the County Historical Commission chairman, and I thought, oh, that'll be kind of nice and fun. And so I was down here a lot, and I would not look at this building. I just, you know, it just, my eyes just wouldn't glance that way. In fact, I gave some bus tours for the doctor's wives. We did that when conventions were in town. And I remember going down Elm Street, and we were turning the corner on Houston, and I was pointing out John Neely Bryan's cabin and the old red courthouse where the bus listed to the right side, and they were all saying, is it, you know, I said, and I was kind of offended that that's all they wanted to see in Dallas, because obviously I had put it out of my mind. But when I was appointed as chairman of the Historical Commission and being down here a great deal and seeing the visitation at the site, incredibly, all day, all night, all kinds of weather, there were visitors looking up at the window, walking around, and it became evident that something needed to be done. You're the hero of today, and we are so appreciative of the masterful job you did on this book. And it's recorded all of our ups and downs, and you did just such a wonderful job.
Well, thank you.
Now, my first hero was Judson Shook, who was the facilities director of Dallas County. And I would go to commissioner court meetings and meet the various, you know, commissioners and hear Judson talk about the possibility of acquiring this building. So it was not news to me But he he handled that so beautifully. And there were two miracles that occurred. That through Judson's efforts, number one, the building was acquired and was safe. Number two, the Commissioners Court decided to hire an architectural team, a group that had done the Sedco building. I don't know if any of you remember that wonderful restoration. It was kind of one of Dallas's first major historic preservation projects. And he had also worked on the governor's map. This group had, Burson, Hendricks, and Wall. So that was such a relief as a preservationist that these persons who were very knowledgeable about historic buildings would be working on it. So it gave me a total sense of comfort, but I was called one day to a meeting, and and we went to Judson's office, and I was accompanied by Martin Giroux. Well, I'd met Martin in some of the Commissioners Court meetings. He's such a gallant and wonderful man, and I had no idea that he was the producer, Hollywood producer of Breakfast at Tiffany's and The Great Race. I just knew he loved history. And so the three of us were over in Judson's office, and he brought us across the street. We walked to the back through this eerie, dusty, terrible building to the back elevator, freight elevator, and went up to 6. They had an elevator in the front, but it just went to 2 floors. So when we walked up into that empty space and walked across the floor, it was a profound experience. It's one you'll never forget. And I looked out the window, and I've never held a gun in my hand, and I looked down and I thought, this is so close. I think I could hit something from here. And that's a misnomer generally by the general public that this is a great open space, but it really is not. It's very compressed. So realizing what we had ahead of us and how important this was, I literally signed on to do anything I could to help promote, or not promote, but to build something on the 6th floor that would be part of Dallas's history, the history of the world, what happened on that terrible day. And so that's where Conover comes in.
Absolutely. Conover, the first thing you really did for this project was see what visitor interest there was in an exhibition on the 6th floor. You went out to the plaza, did a visitor survey. You had some difficulty finding statistics for visitation. Tell us about that.
Well, the Texas Historical Commission, Lindeln called them, and they gave the Historical Commission a $500 grant to bring in
Visiting specialist.
Visiting specialist. And lo and behold, little did I know. And so I went to Judson Shook, and who is fabulous, by the way, and I said, well, what kind of statistics do you have? And he went, what? And so there was nothing about visitor interest in Dealey Plaza. And of course, the county, having acquired the building, the idea of giving away 10,000 square feet of valuable downtown real estate for a nonprofit is something that the taxpayers might ask questions about unless some very strong arguments could be made for public interest. So I called the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and they said, we don't have any statistics. And they said, do you want to know about interest in South Fork? And I said, South Fork isn't even in Dallas County. And they said, well, that doesn't matter. And I said, well, what about, and they said, how about Neiman Marcus? We've got that. And I said, you've got to have something. And they said, Ms. Hunt, we do not have anything on interest in the assassination site. So I went back to Judson. I said, Judson, what say we do a quick and dirty little survey? So we did. And it was a 1-page questionnaire, and we put people out in Dealey Plaza for the course of a week or so. And I had gone to employees whose offices overlooked Dealey Plaza. Are there a lot of people there? Just a few people there? And, you know, with obvious huge interest. And we did a survey and came up with 100% of the people surveyed said that under the right circumstances, an educational exhibit for the public about the event in the School Book Depository they would want to see. If the state paid for it, they didn't want to pay. If private people did it, they were willing to pay a modest admission fee. And that was the basis on which we went forward to the Commissioner's Court saying there's interest, and applied for a little grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the only federal grant we got. And they gave about $8,600 to bring in a panel to study. Now, the county was getting ready to begin renovations to the building, and the 1963 elements on the exterior of the building were still present. The School Book Depository sign, which you saw coming in, the Hertz sign was on the building. We brought in Gene George, may he rest in peace, he died in January, and restoration architect, very, very highly respected, not just in Texas, but nationally, who we promptly dubbed Moses.
Yes, we did, because he didn't say much, but when he spoke, we all listened.
And so we had this panel, and we all sat together, and the panel said, "Who is that?" I said, "That's the media. They'll be taking pictures of us the whole time we meet," and they did for the next 10 years. And but the decisions needed to be made, and Gene examined everything, and he came back and said, "Here's what you need to do." And everything that was removed was recorded. If not all of it preserved, then critical elements of duplicates, were preserved. And so that at some future date, go ahead.
And you remember the discussion about the Hertz sign. And that was very difficult for Gene George because it's such an identifying mark on the city. And he felt that if we removed it, there would be a hue and cry, about, well, what happened to the Hertz sign. And so, but we went upstairs on the roof and walked around, and it was just squishy. I mean, it just gave at every step, and it had caused great cracks in the building. So it became very evident that that was something that needed to be done, and we saved the panels.
It's interesting that on the third floor of this building, they installed a structural truss that in some future date, way down, if they did want to put the sign back up there, it would support the wind load. It was like a giant sail pulling the top 3 or 4 stories of this building off. And it's a wonder it didn't just head right out, and end up in Oklahoma. But so a lot of things went into that. Go ahead.
Let's talk for a moment specifically about the 6th floor. In the early 80s, Bob Staples and Barbara Charles come on board as the exhibit designers. Conover, to talk about how you create an exhibit narrative and fit it geographically within a 1901 warehouse space when you've got to lead our visitors up to the southeast corner window at the right moment in the story that the assassination takes place.
Well, Bob and Barbara ought to be up here explaining that because we relied on them to make that work.
I'm going to interrupt again because they were in Dallas with a major exhibit at the Hall of State. And John Crane, right here, said these are probably the finest exhibit designers ever, and certainly in the United States. They did not want to come up and see the floor. They were very kind, very generous, and did come one afternoon. Well, there's Bob Staples. I watched him, and there's Barbara. And they immediately, you could see the wheels turning. This needs to be preserved. This needs to be preserved. This could be done in certain ways. And so, excuse me for interrupting.
You didn't.
Because that was a key element. That the fact that later they did call and say that yes, they'd be on board.
Lindeland talked them into it.
No, they said, She knew we were determined and it might as well be done well.
And it was. But,
In the summer of 1983, with a model of the exhibit, the two of you, went out into the Dallas community to speak to community leaders like Stanley Marcus and John Stemmons to try to convince the Dallas establishment that this exhibit needed to happen, that it served a purpose. Take us into one of those meetings. Tell us how one of these city leaders responded to the story of the exhibit.
do the hatchet one.
Oh.
You don't with John
Well,
Stemmons?
I will say this.
Yeah.
It was very primitive. We took our own projector and our slides, and we depended upon having a blank wall to project our slides on at all these, with these different businessmen. And so we went to see Stanley Marcus. He was very kind to us, very gracious. And we looked around, there was not a blank wall in the whole place. And behind him was this priceless tapestry. And so he reached around behind his desk and pulled out a great big piece of parchment with his caricature on one side. He turned it around, called his secretary to bring some, thumbtacks, and he himself thumbtacked it up on the wall so we could give our presentation. He was very kind, very supportive, and but that was an interesting. And we went to see Eric Johnson, and that was
Oh boy.
oh, I'll never forget, because everyone relives where they were. I don't care if you were 6 years old or 80, that you remember where you were and what was happening when this event occurred. So there's Eric Johnson, who was called on to go to the Kennedy funeral and represent Dallas. If you can imagine anything harder than that, I don't know what it'd be. And then he came back to Dallas and answered the call to be the mayor, and then, helped us heal. And then, shall we talk about John, Big John?
That was the hatchet.
Oh,
Remember he had a hatchet on his desk?
I tend to forget things I don't like to
Just
see.
as well. I didn't forget that.
John Crane was the director of the Historical Society. I was on the board and, was becoming the first president they'd ever had in 60 years. And John Stemmons was on the board, and Tom McCartan, publishers of both papers, and we had both papers. And it was, a dynamic group. So I knew these men, and we made an appointment to go see John. Well, his sister-in-law, his brother, whom he adored, had died. But his sister-in-law still had an office next to John. And so he called her in, he called his longtime assistant in, and sat down, and Conover and I told the story with the slides. All of a sudden, sister-in-law, wonderful Grace Stemmons, excused herself. And then his assistant excused herself, and Conover and I were sitting with John Stemmons behind that huge desk. He was about 6'4", and I always thought of him as Mr. Dallas, not saying a word. And finally, he spoke. He said, "Well, it has to be done. You girls go ahead." So it was that kind of adventure.
Now, in the early 80s, this exhibit ran into a number of delays and obstacles, outside forces. I want to just go through a couple of these. Initially, the National Park Service did not consider this to be a historic site worth preserving. Initial fundraising efforts were unsuccessful. Then the attempted assassination of President Reagan brought attention back on Dallas. John Hinckley had bought the gun used to shoot Reagan here. He collected material on Lee Harvey Oswald. That pushed fundraising under the table for a couple of years. And then there was an arson attempt during the 1984 Republican National Convention. The building almost burned down.
Oh, goodness. Reuben Adams was an obstetrician, and he was accustomed to answering the phone in the middle of the night and everything. About 4 a.m. one morning, he said, he answered the phone and he said, "She's still asleep." And then he said, "It's for you." And this reporter from, I've forgotten which paper now, but at any rate, called and said, "Mrs. Adams, there's been a flyer in the Texas School Book Depository." Now, mind you, this was in the middle or toward the end of the Republican National Convention, with everyone still here in town. So I quickly dressed and, ran down here. And by the time I got here, and I was visiting with the county judge, I mean, we were just like, what else could happen? They had the fire under control, and it turned out to have been set, and it was arson in the basement with a lot of the things that Mr. Sissom, who had a JFK museum across the street, had donated to us. And so there was no great loss except damage to the building. But it was something that could be repaired.
So a number of these obstacles got in your way, but there was also this prevailing notion that this was not going to work, that any exhibit in this building would be a shrine to Lee Harvey Oswald, and you had to battle these feelings, this animosity towards the idea of anything historic in this building. I want to take a quick look at a video clip that we prepared. Gary Mack prepared this for us, and we want to thank our friends at WFAA-TV for providing this to us and allowing us to show it today. We're going to look at a clip from late 1986. You're going to see Lindalen and hear about ongoing efforts to try and raise interest and awareness in the sixth floor project.
Dallas Group announced plans to build an exhibit recounting President Kennedy's assassination, but little has come of that display, which is to be set up on the sixth floor of the old School Book Depository building in downtown Dallas. Tonight, Channel 8's Dan Goplerud reports on new efforts to raise money for that exhibit.
Thousands of tourists visit the site of the Kennedy assassination every year. But for many, looking around outside is not enough.
Well, I'd like to go in. I'd like to see, I'd like to see what happened.
What she and other visitors want to see is the sixth floor of the old School Book Depository, the spot where Lee Harvey Oswald is said to have fired the fatal shot. But this space in what's now the county administration building remains closed to the public. The historical exhibit, once scheduled to open this year, remains several years away.
We have not really gone to the public and to ask for funds in almost 2 years.
Linda Lynn Adams acknowledges the tight economy has pushed the Kennedy display lower on the list of major contributors. But she says a study completed last week suggests starting a new fundraising program. The historical display, a collection of photos, documents, and film clips, will cost $3 million to set up.
A chronological account of the events surrounding the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
To help raise the money, a 6-minute promotional tape will soon be updated and circulated to business leaders and the public. By early next year, the Dallas County Historical Foundation hopes to kick off its new 3-year fundraising campaign.
It's a very tragic part of our history, but it did occur here, and we feel that it needs to be handled in the best possible way.
Visitors' comments in the Foundation's guest book show a continuing interest in the sixth floor exhibit. Foundation officials hope the public will respond with money. Adams says the display will not be what critics call a memorial to an assassin, but rather a chronicle of the events of November 22, 1963. Some say, however, it's still too soon.
All right. So late 1986, and then everything changes in January 1987 with the new Dallas County Judge Lee Jackson, who, quite to your surprise, pledged his support in his inauguration that he wanted to see the sixth floor become a reality, and everything took off right after that.
It's like Christmas and New Year's all together. Before that, almost the day before, we had a visitor from the National Park Service in Santa Fe. His name was Richard Sellers. And he wanted to see the sixth floor. He was here for the Cotton Bowl game. And so we took him up and we told him about the plans that had been developed through the years by Conover and all of the consultants. And he said, this more than meets standards of the Park Service. And he was very, interested in doing what he could to help. So that was so terribly exciting. And then to have Lee, whom I'd never met, make this announcement in his inauguration or when he became county judge was, again, just a thrill. And so this started, you know, the final push to have that kind of support and backing, and Conover came back to lead the charge, which she did so beautifully.
Well, we did.
I mean, it wouldn't have been done, wouldn't have been finished maybe ever, if it hadn't been for Conover and her ability and her drive and the dedication of all the consultants who worked on it and stayed with it through the years in the various planning meetings that we had.
True.
Let's talk about construction for a minute. Conover, there's a couple of stories I'd like you to share with us. You were battling outside forces regarding the exterior elevator shaft. You were battling DART, who wanted to build a subway portal right through the grassy knoll at one time. The visitor center we see in this photograph being constructed here, but early on you had a problem with the brick not matching what you wanted, the specifications.
Well, once we won the war about the elevator tower, which made the New York Times, the county, of course, very involved in all of the construction because it's their building. We ordered brick that would be compatible with the sort of American brick color of the depository building, which has a lot of orange in it. And what arrived to build this tower in was horrible. And so we called the owner of the company, and he flew in. And we stood and looked out the back of the 6th floor at where the tower was going to be. And he said, "That color is perfect." And Judge Fox, Dave Fox, who was fabulous, of course, was standing next to me. And I turned around to this guy and I said, "Let me make sure that I get your name and your telephone number." And he said, "Well, why?" I said, "Because when the New York Times calls and asks why Dallas has built an elevator tower that looks for all intents and purposes like a dreamsicle, I want to make sure that I can give them your contact information." And actually, it's the only time I ever saw Dave Fox's mouth fall open. And he looked at me afterwards. He said, "That ought to do it." But there were delays. We had more ice storms, and it was, you know, it was just amazing that it all came together in the nick of time.
The key evidentiary area, the sniper's nest, southeast corner of the 6th floor, of course, was reconstructed to the way it appeared in Dallas police crime scene photographs. When you pulled up the plywood floor, tell us about how that site was prepared for exhibition.
Well, they were laying a new floor on the 6th floor when the assassination took place, these plywood planks. They hadn't gotten to the corner window, so we knew that the old flooring had been there. So the planks were finished after the event, and they had to come up for the, you know, reconstruction of the sniper's perch. So we go in and we pull up the planking, and we were terrified that the flooring would be all rotted out or anything, but that was not the problem. The problem was that the head of the civil section of the DA had his office immediately beneath the sniper's perch on the 5th floor. And when they ripped up the planks, all this pigeon guano and, I mean, dead spiders, historic dirt. We always said we're preserving the dirt. Well, it ended up in his office. And I went down. Somebody came up and said, "We've got a problem." And I went down, and he was in his office. The man was totally bald. He never had a hair on his head. And I looked, and in the frame of the picture of his wife and kids, there were little bits of gras-doux and you know, and stuff all over the sofa. And I said, "This is just terribly embarrassing." And he said, "Just tell me that it's over." And I said, "It's up, it's done, we'll send somebody down to clean it up." But
let's talk about the dig now. This
was
about the same time, because the visitor center was being built in the back, and the state or national, I don't know who mandates a dig in a historic area. Well, Conover, we watched from the 5th floor as they kept digging, and I think you said the worst thing that they can find is a handmade well. Guess what appeared? A handmade brick well. You could see it. You know, and one of the county administrators said, "Do you suppose it'd be a felony if we backed up a load of concrete and filled it in?" Anyway, but it you know, kind of went on and on and on, and so Conover kept saying, "Now, if we find any bones, like woolly mammoth bones, that means that we have to completely do a new dig." So, to provide a little levity, Lee Jackson's friends, a group of judges, got together for an April Fool's joke. Conover went to the Dallas Museum of Natural History and borrowed a woolly mammoth bone. Now, it was tagged and it was shellacked, but it was very impressive.
About that long. Yeah.
They brought in, you know, all of these friends. Jim Jackson, who was never just totally thrilled with this whole project, had a part, and his part was to come in, barrel in with television reporters, which he did beautifully. He came in, he said, "Judge, I just found out that they found a woolly mammoth bone, and you know what that means, another $75,000 for this dig. And these newsmen, may we see you, talk to you, Judge? I'm afraid I must ask you to leave my office." And of course, my part was to hold the bone and kind of, you know, do like this. He was so used to seeing me rub my hands over one thing or another. And so it worked. And so then Jim Jackson said, "Lee, come over here to the window and look out," and Lee did, and here were all of his friends, attorney friends, saying, "April Fool." We were always afraid there might be repercussions. Judge Jackson led this commissioner's court in such a wonderful way. He was our champion and kept it from any controversy.
Let's talk for a minute about the exhibit content, because you had a limited space to tell a very important story, the life, death, and legacy of President Kennedy within the context of 1960s American history. How did you work with historians, amateur researchers, conspiracy theorists? There were some 27 people that helped to shape the content. Talk a little bit about how it came together.
Well, the preliminary designs that had been worked out with Staples and Charles. What was missing until we came back to life in '87 was the documentary filmmakers, and that's when the Mondells came in to complete the team.
But they're on the first floor, right here.
First row. At any rate, there's nothing about the content that you couldn't question. And so we had a large number of experts from the CIA, I mean, you name it. It ended up being 20-some, who worked on arriving at what was a consensus of what the facts were. If you go into the Warren Commission exhibits, they give you, and Gary will correct me, he always does, 3 different times that Officer Tippit was shot. And there's a lot of apparently contradictory information. We had official investigations, and then we had to do overviews of the major conspiracy theories. Just a tremendous amount of information went into it. We also wanted to, I mean, there are 100 pages of text on the walls. That's about 50 pages too much. There's about a 35% overlap between the content of the films and what's on the walls and in the labels. And it was very much, we were all very aware of the fact that you have what we say in the museum field as readers and runners. Some people go through an exhibit and they run. Some people go through an exhibit and read and find every typo in the whole thing. So it was all very carefully balanced out, but we had a wonderful dinner party with the main that generation of conspiracy theorists. and the head of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and Mary Farrell was there, who was a respected researcher. And it was just this incredible dinner party. I would not recommend that anyone have such a dinner party. We survived it, and just tremendous amounts of beverages were consumed. And nobody ate anything at all, as far as I could tell. But we worked out. They understood that we were doing history, that we needed to find an approach, that you couldn't do an exhibit on their theory versus another theory, that we had a responsibility to say how tax dollars had been spent in history, and it all worked out. I don't think too many people know that the editor of the text was Judge Jackson, who ended up being a terrific editor. And we had, I mean, everyone was involved. So there was a lot of coordination. Actually, everyone came together and cooperated largely. We had retired CIA staff director who came in to work with Staples and Charles. They called me at 7:30 on a Saturday. This guy has applied for a job. What do you think? I said, look, let them in. Better that they're up front, you know, keep them close. But and everyone was very helpful. But everyone finally got the idea that we were doing something that was more important than any of the individuals involved, and that we were doing it for the public. And the public was people from all over the world who were either ignorant about an event, confused about an event, and we had the site, and it was Dallas's karma that they had to deal with it. And that's basically what happened.
Opening day arrives February 20th, 1989, and the sixth floor is under the media microscope, and mostly praise, a few detractors, but mostly praise. I remember that the front page of the Dallas Times-Herald that day read simply, "Today we stand whole again." Lyndall, and you were there that day. There was a ceremony in the Commissioner's Court, and 1,700 people filed through the exhibit. Tell us about opening day.
Well, people kept asking for my autograph, and I hardly could sign, you know. But it was, we thanked each other. I thank Conover because it is true this would not have been done if it hadn't been for Conover and her ability and drive and keeping it moving.
I thank her.
And she thanked me, and we had the president of the National Trust. No, wait a minute.
Yeah,
Jackson Walter, who spoke and was very complimentary. I remember he likened me to a name that didn't mean Ann Pamela Cunningham, and I thought, oh my goodness, what a compliment. She was the one who saved Mount Vernon in 1854.
Well, may I interrupt this time?
Yes.
He also said that Lyndall and Adams is a Mack truck disguised as a pink powder puff.
That was another president of the National Trust.
Well, we're running short of time. You have question cards. You should have gotten those as you came in today. If you have a question for any of us today, please fill those out, pass them to the end of your rows, and we will be collecting those and try to get through as many questions as we can. So let's fast forward from opening day. Let's fast forward 25 years to our upcoming 25th anniversary in February of next year. This institution began life as an exhibit. Some would say it was a temporary exhibit because its longevity at that point was not assured. Where are we now? How do the two of you see this museum and its contribution to understanding Dallas and the Kennedy assassination?
Well, I think we both felt that it was going to last because we realized what had been compiled here. But we were very careful not to call it a museum. I mean, Dallas still, you know, there are repercussions and feelings of sensitivity about this site even today. And so in order to move ahead and to plan an exhibit, that was what we called it for the first few years. And then later, I think Jeff West was the director and actually worked with National Museum Association,
yeah.
American Association Museum.
So it is now a verified museum. But we felt it would last. I think I did. I know you did too.
Oh, yes. A lot of the obstacles that we faced, you were talking about convincing a town that has been totally traumatized to invest in something they can't see with their... Once we got it open, it was largely fine. But getting it open was, you know, you're asking them to trust in an unknown when there have been very, very many, much damage has been done. Not just to the community, but to individuals who were yelled at when they went to other cities and so on and so forth. And so anything that could trigger a fearful reaction. If you said museum, they immediately started talking about you're going to have, you know, the rifle, you're going to have all these unsavory things, and we just moved away from that. The board was very, very good, led by Lindelin, in getting the right tone. I looked at it as my job to get it open, and then knowing and praying that it would be successful. Because Barbara Charles asked me before, she said, well, who's going to cover the opening? I said, the media. It'll be a breaking news story. And she said, well, what if they don't like it? And I said, well, Barbara, that's easy. None of us will ever work anywhere again.
But we're leaving. We left out the board. And we
the
had
board
the
was
most
fabulous.
wonderful board.
Yeah.
And then something that happened one day when we were really in the midst of all this. A dear lady by the name of Nancy Cheney was working on the Alzheimer's gala with Rita Hayworth's gala, and she wanted me to be the co-chairman, and came down to the house, and we were visiting, and she just casually said, you know, we are friends of the Kennedy family, that they do invite us to all of their events and parties. And I said, Senator Ted Kennedy? And she said, yes, my daughter worked for him, and Allison is here on the front row, as well as Nancy Cheney. And so I told her the scope of what we were trying to do. And I said, Nancy, would you mind taking this information to Senator Kennedy? And she agreed to do it. Think of that. Just think of that. We had never been in contact with any of the Kennedy family. Too painful. Something, you know, we would know that we knew that they wouldn't want to hear. But Nancy took our materials, and I'd love for you to be able to tell us, but what happened is that Ted Kennedy did read them. He said, Nancy, I know if you're involved, it's going to be all right. And from that point on, his assistant, Melody Miller, kept in touch with us and actually came down to Dallas to meet all of us. And so we had that open conduit, you know, to the Kennedy family. Nancy, stand up. We want to thank you. Well, and after she visited with Ted Kennedy, he asked her to go to New York and visit with Steve
Smith.
Yeah, Smith. Steve Smith about it, who then was in contact, right, with the family. So
I want to go through a few of our questions from the audience today. This one is addressed to all three of us. Where were you when President Kennedy was shot? Now, I have to say, I have to disqualify myself from this. I was not alive when President Kennedy was shot. But whoever wrote this, my mother's here, and she might want to have a word with you after the program today. I was actually born several years after the assassination, but the two of you certainly remember where you were on November 22nd, 1963. If you could briefly tell us where you were and how you found out about the assassination.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was at home, and I was having a meeting at my house of doctors' wives, and all of a sudden, Reuben appeared. And he was parked in his office, overlooked the emergency room. And he couldn't get through to tell us what happened because all the lines were tied up. So he came in and he said, "Turn on the television." And we did, and we stood around and watched. And he said, "President Kennedy was shot in the head." And I said, "Oh, you know, is there any way he would survive?" And so that's how I found out about it.
Mm-hmm. I was leaving my last class on a Friday in Hampton High School. I was a senior and was involved with the newspaper for the school, and I was a feature editor, and the news editor ran around with the transistor radio. And we were walking down this long hallway, and Prentice Gandy, radio, says, "Kennedy has been shot." And I realized later that what he had heard was the first radio announcement. And he yelled it down the hall, and that was it. Now, there are parts of the peak memory, everybody, you know, remembers what they were doing. But if you'll look at your memory in more depth, you'll find that the edges of it are very gray. Yeah.
Well, and, you know, here in Dallas, it touched so many lives in so many ways because all the emergency trauma team were good friends of ours. And also, Rube went back on Sunday to make rounds, and he was on the elevator going up to surgical suite by himself, and they pushed a gurney on with him, and it was a comatose man, he said, and it turned out to be Oswald. Well, the team who had worked to save President Kennedy's life turned out to also be on call for when Oswald came in. And our next door neighbor when I was growing up was the thoracic surgeon who saved Connolly's life. We had an extended member of the family who was an FBI agent here, and he was one of the ones who interrogated Oswald. And he would never, ever say anything about it until right before he died. And it was just 3 or 4 words in his opinion. Of course, you know, that story is all out, but he basically said, and I quote, he was such a distinguished man, he said, "He was a little punk and he did it." I thought, wow.
Well, stories like the ones you shared today are very important to us at the museum. They form the backbone of our ongoing oral history project. Lyndall, you helped to start that project way back in the early years of the museum. Excuse me, Conover, you helped to start that project way back in the early years. We have almost 1,100 oral histories now recorded, and as we approach the 25th anniversary of the museum, we're looking for new stories. If you have memories of President Kennedy or the day of the assassination that you'd like to share with us, please contact us through our website at jfk.org. And I would like to ask all of the people in the audience, if you have done an oral history, if you've been part of our oral history project at the museum, stand for me so we can recognize you. There's quite a few of you in the audience today. That's wonderful. I hope that even more of you will become part of this archive of living history we're building at the museum. Another question, this is directed to both of you. Do you have any regrets, or is there anything that you wish you had done differently in the creation of this museum?
Just thank goodness it's done.
No. It wasn't the kind of thing you could second guess.
Right.
I mean, you know, you either survived or you didn't. I was very gratified to see that it was well received. Hindsight you know, the thing was we needed to get it open. We knew it was going to be good content because we had excellent people involved. And it was a matter of getting it open to the public so that the fears would be laid to rest. That was kind of it.
Conover, this question is for you. How do you feel about the museum today in 2013?
I think that it has become a real museum, and Nicola is a museum professional of great talent, and it's doing all of the things that are truly important, nationally respected museum. The education programs, the outreach, the distance learning, the oral history program, the publications, your book, and the, you know, Gary Mack is doing a fabulous job as the curator and advising others. I went to see the Fort Worth, you know, art show at the Art Museum with, you know, Alan and Cynthia yesterday, and the film in there was done by the 6th floor. And the accurate quality, you know, it's the magnet that I always dreamed it would become. It has the best collection of materials relating to a global tragedy that exists on the face of the earth, and now it's doing the right things with that material. And so I think that Dallas should be very proud of the professionals who have come through in the last 20-some years and really turned it into a nationally respected educational institution.
And I would like for everybody who worked in any way on the 6th floor museum to stand and let us recognize you.
Come on. Up you go.
Look at this. Yes.
Well, that about does it for today. Conover, Lindelen, and myself will be moving over to that table in a few moments to sign books for you. And with all of these other wonderful founders here today, I'm sure all of them would be happy to add their signatures to the book as well. And you can create your very own 6th Floor Museum yearbook. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Thank you so much for being here today and being part of this special conversation about our history. Thank you.
For more information about the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza, visit jfk.org.
These two ladies, I want to go back in time a little bit and provide a little context so we understand what happened here to this site between November 22nd, 1963 and when these fine ladies became involved in this project in the 1970s. And we have to start, of course, with the day of the assassination. Here are these two women here. We wouldn't be here today. We would not be able to speak in this historic space without these two women. And we and history owe them a great debt of thanks. And so we're honored to have them here with us today. I want to begin with the assassination of President Kennedy, which had a profound impact on people around the world. But here in Dallas, this was a devastating tragedy that left indelible wounds that were not easily healed. Virtually overnight, Dealey Plaza became the city's most visited site. Mourners and curiosity seekers transformed the plaza into a shrine with flowers and note cards. And at the center of this experience was the Texas School Book Depository building. When the textbook distribution company vacated this warehouse in 1970, there was an immediate public outcry to tear down the structure. Many in the local community viewed this structure as an eyesore and a painful reminder of the assassination. The anger directed locally at this building stemmed from the international criticism that Dallas endured after the assassination. In the months and years leading up to President Kennedy's visit, a vocal minority of extremists had dominated the political image of the city. And in the aftermath of the president's death, Dallas bore a stigma as a city of hate that took years to shed. Ashamed and angry, Dallasites naturally sought to distance themselves from the darkest moment in the city's life.
Up next on Book TV, a panel discussion on the creation of the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza, housed in the former Texas School Book Depository, which remembers the life, presidential tenure, and assassination of President John F. Kennedy. This is an hour.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. This is truly a remarkable audience. I have been with the museum now for 13 years, and I can't think of another event, another program where we've had an audience quite like this. There are far too many people who require recognition for me to catch everyone's name, so please forgive me if I don't acknowledge you. But I do want to point out some of our special guests today. Jim Lavelle, the retired police detective who was handcuffed to Lee Harvey Oswald at the time he was shot, is here. You might want to save your applause because I got a lot to go through here, so hang on. And seated very close to Jim is Eugene Boone, the Dallas deputy sheriff who discovered the rifle on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository that day. And also over in that area we have Phyllis Hall, I believe, a nurse from Parkland Hospital who was in trauma room number 1 when President Kennedy died. And also over there is Rose Blatch, who worked for the Time Life Bureau in Houston at the time of the assassination. And over behind Rose we have the wonderful Julian Reed, who was press aide to Governor John Connally at the time of the assassination. And on Julian's row is Pierce Allman, one of the first reporters inside this building after the assassination. Pierce was later our tour narrator for the audio time, Its Place in History. The question remained, however, what do we do with the infamous 6th floor? And that's where our story begins today. Lyndalyn, you were chair of the Dallas County Historical Commission when the county bought the building. Take us back to your first visit to that empty floor and your first reaction when you found out that there might be an exhibition on the 6th floor of this building.
Well, I'm going even farther back than that.
Okay,
because
it's your program.
I was appointed in 1975 to be the County Historical Commission chairman, and I thought, oh, that'll be kind of nice and fun. And so I was down here a lot, and I would not look at this building. I just, you know, my eyes just wouldn't glance that way. In fact, I gave some bus tours for the doctor's wives. We did that when conventions were in town. And I remember going down Elm Street, and we were turning the corner on Houston, and I was pointing out John Neely Bryan's cabin and the old red courthouse where the bus listed to the right side, and they were all saying, is it, you know, I said, and I was kind of offended that that's all they wanted to see in Dallas, because obviously I had put it out of my mind. But when I was appointed as chairman of the Historical Commission and being down here a great deal and seeing the visitation at the site, incredibly, all day, all night, all kinds of weather, there were visitors looking up at the window, walking around, and
tour which continues to guide guests through the 6th floor exhibit today. I think I got that section over in here. I do want to go through this very quickly. We do have some eyewitnesses to the assassination here. We have Tina Towner Pender, who's here, who was our youngest photographer in Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination. Seated behind Tina are Bill and Gail Newman, the closest civilian eyewitnesses to President Kennedy at the time of his shooting. Is James Tague here today? He was supposed to be here. I'm not sure if he is or not, but that's okay. We hope all is well with Jim. Let's see, we have some other folks here. Wayman Rose, who was the 10th juror selected for the Jack Ruby trial, is here today. Let's see, is Dr. Phil Williams here? All right, all right. Well, I know we have others, and we have a number of museum founders as well as people involved in the story of the assassination. Here on the front row, Alan and Cynthia Mondell are wonderful documentarians who created the films that you continue to see on the 6th floor to this day. Where is Bob Staples and Barbara Charles?
Bob's here
wonderful.
And Barbara's over there.
Okay, here on either side of the room are wonderful exhibit designers who created such a wonderful display which continues to fascinate our visitors almost 25 years after the museum opened. Jackie McElhaney is here, who did research for the exhibit and also was involved in reconstructing the sniper's perch. A number of our board members, past and present, are here. Nancy Cheney, I see, John Crane, Jill Johnson, over here Victor Elmore, Ruben Esquivel is here somewhere. There he is, wonderful. We're so happy to have all of you here today. There's so many friends and family and professional colleagues. We are so honored to have all of you here, to be here to celebrate the museum's history and to look back on how this museum became a reality. reality. I've written a book about the history of this museum, and as an introduction today, before I introduce modern history, though eager to put the assassination behind them, local residents did not forget to honor the memory of President Kennedy. A bronze marker was unveiled in Dealey Plaza in 1966, while Philip Johnson's cenotaph, the John F. Kennedy Memorial, was dedicated nearby in 1970. But it was here, in this building, that visitors from around the world, estimated at over 1 million annually, gathered in Dealey Plaza to discuss the assassination, remember President Kennedy, and experience history through their own eyes. There was initially an effort by State Senator Mike McCool for the state of Texas to purchase the building, but he found no support in the Senate. And in 1970, a Nashville music promoter purchased the building at public auction, hoping to open a museum and research center. But unable to secure financial backing, Aubrey Mayhew lost the depository in 1972. At this point, a public outcry to demolish the building really gained momentum. Community leaders such as Tom Landry, Mary Kay Ash, and Ross Perot advocated tearing down the depository, and a group of business executives formed an organization called Dallas Onward and pledged over $100,000 to purchase the building and demolish it. Ultimately, after the Dallas City Council, led by Mayor Wes Wise, froze demolition permits on the building, Dallas County, led by Public Works Director Judson Shook, arranged to purchase the depository as part of a 1977 bond package. After several years of renovations, the building was renamed the Dallas County Administration Building, housing the Commissioner's Court, Public Works, and the Civil Division of the Dallas District Attorney's Office. Upon its reopening in 1981, it received a Texas historical marker, publicly acknowledging for the first